From the garage that sparked the global self-care movement, welcome to the Human Garage Experience, a podcast where we have unfiltered conversations on self-healing, consciousness, and optimizing your life with fascinating individuals changing the status quo. I'm your host, Garry Lineham, and I'm honored to have you here. Let's get down to it. Chris, it's good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
I like to sync up. What we do is we sync up before meetings. Want to do it with me?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay, so cross your right foot over top your left. Right hand underneath left armpit. Left hand on top. Turn your head to the left and your body to the right. We'll take 6 breaths together, 3 through the mouth and 3 through the nose. So breathe in. 2. 3. Through the nose. 2. 3. Kind of brings us into our own little bubble. So, we can edit this out, but is it Nordic Laboratories or Nordic Labs?
Nordic Laboratories.
Okay. Do I have to say it laboratories, or can I say
it the English
laboratories? Just wondering if I have to do it the English way, or
you have to do it the English way.
Well, because I am Canadian, so actually I grew up Canadian English or British English, but I just don't speak it that way.
Yeah, but and it's funny enough, it's one of those words that's universal, but everyone pronounces differently.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I wouldn't say laboratories, but laboratories.
Sure.
Okay.
Laboratories.
Nordic Laboratories. Why do you do this, and why is it so important?
Well, fundamentally, in the early 80s, I think I even, as a very young boy, became aware that whatever we were doing in the world, in medicine, in healthcare, didn't seem right. I remember seeing my grandmother in 1984-ish with a bunch of pills, all different colours, and she was proudly telling me this was for my hiatus hernia, this was for my depression, this was for antacids for an ulcer, this was that, and this and that, and then this one is to block this one, and this one is to block. She knew them all, but she didn't know how to get off them. And I just think I was challenged by that dogma that disease manifestation is cured by a pill, when patently that wasn't happening. I don't know, it wasn't something I was reading, it was just something that was intuitive. So the why is, firstly, the query that I have is, why are we still heading down this one pill to fix all ill, even in the 2020s, when it's quite clear that some people benefit tremendously from a diet, exercise, mindfulness, sleep, environment, and do very well. They don't get diseased. So what I'd set about in the early 90s was the idea, could I change healthcare? And I say that with some sort of smile on my lips, because of course as a 24-year-old, then you think you can conquer the world. As a 54-year-old, you realize that's quite difficult, but you keep plodding away. So the why, or the effort was, could we, when we established our company, help change the narrative around health? And that remains the same goal.
When you say the narrative around health, in some respects, you're actually still running a lab, which is supporting doctors. How do you change the narrative around health when it's the same mechanism of discovery and delivery?
Firstly, Nordic Laboratories is part of a much bigger organization called Nordic Group, and in Nordic Group we have clinics, we have supplement companies, we have food companies. We're also looking at measuring antibiotic resistance in the environment. We're looking at developing technology to measure inflammation in breast tissue, so women don't have to wait to a mammogram, but rather, whilst they're still healthy, can understand if they have inflammation earlier in their breasts, that would indicate a potential risk of developing something much later on, but rather treat a low-level inflammation than a tumour 10, 15, 20 years later. So Nordic Laboratories is an agent of that change. And what we set about was the idea that every individual is unique biochemically. So there's no point you going to the doctor and say, I have a sore throat, or I have a migraine, or I have an eczema. And the doctor goes to his little book of guidelines and gives exactly the pill or the cream or whatever according to the guidelines, because your biochemistry might be exhibiting something else. And that's what really got me into the laboratory side. It was, could we help you understand more about your body so that the choices that the doctor or the practitioner that would make is around that individual biochemistry, immunology, and later hormonal endocrine systems, and later again genetics.
So you've mentioned, actually you have basically a pharmacy, you also have clinics, and you have laboratories. So I said it right.
You did it. Good.
So that you're looking at the full circle.
Yeah.
One of the things that I started with when I started Human Garage Clinic is we basically fundamentally took over a lab, because we became so big that the lab was just testing and experimenting, and we were using the feedback from the lab constantly to modify the protocols of people.
Yeah.
And that's effectively what you're doing,
Absolutely.
Right?
That's exactly what we do.
And how long have you been doing this?
We established the company in '97, but if I take a step back, if I may, the reason why I pivoted so much to this area was I met a doctor in 1994 in the back streets of Copenhagen, and I say the back streets. This wasn't some plush hospital with all the mod cons and gadgets. This was a back street, small clinic, and I had coincidentally met this guy, and I asked him what he did, and he said, well, we're doing all these new tests to measure the individuality, the performance of the individual. And I remember thinking, what is this guy saying? Why would he be doing something so different than the main healthcare system? And so I went back a second time and had a similar discussion, and I remember walking out and pointing up to heaven and saying, what is going on? I turned in, went into his office, and I said, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm going to give you 6 months of my life. In exchange, you teach me everything you know, and we'll build a laboratory business to help you and your clients. So that's how it started. Literally one man, and I'm forever grateful for that conversation, because he steered me in that direction. And then I spent the next 3 years really jumping between Europe and America, going to a lot of these fledgling small laboratories that were experimenting, just as you were saying, that, what does this biomarker mean? How can we use it in a clinical workup? And then understanding the underlying challenges of every laboratory. Every laboratory test has an inherent weakness. And you have to find that first, because otherwise you end up risking giving a false positive or false negative. But once you identify that, you can then adapt your protocols, your underlying methods, make sure you've got the right technology, and then you have a test that is valid to be used at a given time in history. So, the reality is that laboratory science evolves and evolves and evolves, just like every other aspect of humanity. And it's slightly odd that we have conventional healthcare systems using assays, tests, that were really invented in the 1970s and 80s. They're still being used in the 2020s. And that to me is
Well, isn't that actually the case? And I wanted to bring this up because fundamentally what you're doing is different. The average person is going out to a doctor, they're getting a set of tests that in truth actually have very little relevance to their health. And we're basing all of the information that we drive our health and health decisions on those tests. The example that I would say is a lot of the testing you do, I would draw the analogy of a garage or a car. A lot of the testing that is done out there is called a speed test. It says, I'm going 50 have to adjust it for this reading. I'm going 50 kilometers an hour, you're going 50 kilometers an hour, and 3 other people are going 50 kilometers an hour. But what it's not telling us is how hard our engine's working to make that speed. And what effectively a lot of your laboratory work is doing is telling us how hard we're working to make up what we see, which gives you a better indication, because if I'm at 50 kilometers an hour, if I'm 9,000 RPM to do that, and you're at 3,000 RPM, one of us is going to look very different in 9 months or a year or
Sure.
5 years. Fundamentally, this draws a big question. What do you think of conventional current testing that we go to a doctor today, we sign up, we do our blood work, and they look at it and they say we're healthy or we're not? What do you say, or what do you feel when that's being done right now?
Firstly, we've got to ask, what is it measuring and why? So there are certain tests that are used, and I'm going to go a little bit far out, but HIV is an example. HIV is a very good test method that if you have HIV, you will be tested positive, and that will be that's a valid report from a conventional assay. When you start going into biological impact factors, like that car going at 50 kilometers an hour and having to need an oil change, or actually finding the pistons are firing fantastically well and the acceleration is working, that's the difference. And so a lot of these tests that are used in conventional medicine are looking for a standardization. For example, LDL above 6, then you need to be on a statin. But if you're at 5.9, you don't. And that seems to be incredibly arbitrary. At the least it's arbitrary. And they keep lowering the levels so that they can prescribe more medication. More statins. Yeah. And
especially statins, right?
Yeah. And the other thing about it is you've got to ask yourself the question, how did you get to that stage, even if that number is correct? So now I'm going to say something a little bit more problematic. If you took that blood sample and put it into 3 or 4 or 5 tubes and sent them to 3 or 4 or 5 different labs,
you're going to get different.
They're not all going to be the same.
Yeah,
There's
true.
a margin of error that is accepted, number one. And number two, the margin of error may actually be much bigger than the accepted norm. We don't know until we thoroughly check it. Now, every laboratory will say, yes, we sign up for all the accreditation processes, we're doing the comparisons, we are perfect. And yet they're not. They're fundamentally not. The other thing, so a doctor that gets a result from lab A that says 6.1 would give a statin. Doctor that's sent to lab B that's got a 6 would say, right on the borderline, I think you probably should take a statin. And at 5.9, you're fine. Right? But in fact, it's the same sample. So that's the first area. The second one is what time of day. This is important. So if you're going to do comparison tests, it has to be with the same laboratory and to collect it normally at the same time of day. Now, a lot of laboratories will say, don't worry, we have this amount of bandwidth, because they know if we get you in at 9 o'clock, you have to be there at 9 o'clock, otherwise the test can't be run. The chances are you won't turn up, and the chances are the lab test, there will be a revenue loss. So it's important that doctors really consider when they're using a test, what are they testing for? What is their strategic goal with it? And make sure it's as robust and precise as possible.
When I had the clinic, I ran 50,000 tests on 10,000 subjects, not equally 5, but sometimes 10, sometimes 1 or 2. But I ran 50,000 tests, and some of them are repeated 3 or 4 times, and they're supposed to not change. So what I found was wide variance. And again, I know it's different time of day. I know it's even different days of the month. And these all have an impact on it.
Sure.
So do you think practitioners, like doctors and practitioners, are aware of this?
No.
And they're not aware of it. They're not aware of the faulty nature of the current testing system, but they're prescribing based upon that system.
I think there's an inherent belief system at play. Why would a lab give a false result? And why, as a clinician, if I follow the guidelines, would I be wrong in not following it? So I'll give you a slightly amusing example. And it was a good friend of mine who's a prominent doctor, and we were educating him. So we do a lot of our time is out educating doctors. That's our focus. Make sure the doctor feels comfortable with the test so that they can prescribe it accordingly to their clinical workup. So we're out with this very charismatic doctor, very funny. I like him a lot. We go out for dinner quite regularly. And I said, now doctor, I just want to explain, and the test is all about a stool collection for gastrointestinal function.
No shit.
No shit. So I said, doctor, I want to tell you how you collect the sample. He said, Chris, I don't need to know that. I have been doing these samples for 30 years. I don't need to know. I said, well, I'm still going to tell you. So in a stool sample that is collected for a microbiome test, typically it is collected into a tray. So the whole excretion into a tray. And then there's a spoon in a tube. And the best way to collect is to really mix up the sample, because the sample is not homogeneous. You're excreting different things at different times from the colon.
Fair statement, yeah.
And I'm saying, and then you take from different sites and you put it into this tube.
But it makes sense if you've eaten like corn, or you've eaten sometimes beetroot or something like that, you'll see it mixed differently in your stool.
And the bacteria or the parasite or the worm or whatever that might be excreted doesn't necessarily sit throughout the...
Sure.
So anyway, I'm telling him this, and he looks up at me and he said, in 30 years, nobody has ever explained to me how to collect a sample. And this is a very experienced, very competent doctor. And it sort of sat in my head since, because if you can't get the basics right, then the rest of the test might be flawed. So for people listening, the very important thing, if they do a laboratory test, please, please, please spend the time to read the instructions. If you're unsure, contact the laboratory. If you're unsure still, contact your doctor, because that test result is going to be used as part of a clinical workup. And if you collect it incorrectly, either you don't collect the sample properly, or you store it incorrectly, or you ship it incorrectly, then that might impact your intervention.
So would you go into a standard doctor today, take a set of normal workup tests, and would you accept medication or advice based on what's currently being done across the world today? For yourself.
It's a very difficult question, because I've spent 30 years of my life building what I would call a resilience in my body to defend against the vagaries of disease. So, and we often listen to these types of podcasts by all sorts of influencers who say, yeah, I haven't done this for so long, I do this, I do that, I'm awesome. So I'm very conscious about what I'm about to say. But the last time I took an antibiotic was in 1994.
Yeah.
I don't take medication. I don't even take an aspirin. I'm doing everything I can to protect my body against infection, against disease. Now, it doesn't mean I will ever get disease. Probably I will, but hopefully it's only one, and there's no comorbidities. So I only get one problem instead of multiple. Like with, for example, with a type 2 diabetic, they're likely to have cardiovascular problems. They might have dementia problems later on. You know, these are comorbidities. So for me, I'm going to my doctor not to find out if I'm ill, but to find out how I can perform better. I'm not looking for a medication. I'm looking to say, am I on the right track? And even small changes of certain markers would say, okay, what do I have to do in my lifestyle to help support that, and then prevent the potential of a biological change?
But I mean, I hear you saying that. 99% of the people listening to that, not in that position. They were going to a doctor because something is wrong.
Yeah, but we have to flip it, irrespective. I understand that is in 2025 our challenge. People go to a doctor when they're sick. Doctors have very short periods of time with any patient. That's a system that's been built up over 70, 80 years. They're doing the best they can based on that limited time frame. But if you, as the consumer, the patient, have used Dr. Google, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, I'm saying that in a learning way, find out about what are your symptoms, think about them, think how they may have occurred, ask when you're doing a lab test, say, what are we trying to look for? And then how do I mitigate any problem? That's how I want to see the doctor-patient relationship developing.
I agree with that. What I'm observing is that when we come to healthcare professionals and we've done the research, they often come off as annoyed, angry, or upset.
The patient or the doctor?
Well, the doctor. I mean, that's...
Because of our information, or because of the strategy that we're trying to pursue, or because of the patient's lack of participation?
No, the patient is participating, and they're coming in asking questions and bringing up information.
Okay.
And I've noticed in many cases where I've talked to people and I've had their interactions, that they bring information in and they're chastised for bringing it in. They're told not to look, and they're told, and I get it from a practitioner's point of view, because people can go pretty wild on symptoms. But I think I would rather have somebody who's invested in their own health, looking and asking the questions, than somebody who just does blindly what I say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if the patient knows best their symptoms, they know best the things that impact them when they make changes. So it's naive of a doctor not to include that in there.
Do you think that's generally practiced in medicine today? Because what you said is true. The patient does know best.
No.
But I don't believe that. I don't believe that that's what's...
The American model is slightly different than the European model, but the European model was set up in post-Second World War to address acute disease and life and death moments. That's why the NHS in Britain was set up. It was not set up for diabetes. It was not set up for cancer. It was not set up for cardiovascular. Yeah. It was set up because we were starving. Post-war Britain, 1947, is the worst year of the war, 2 years after it ends. We're starving. Their food parcels dropped on the Midlands area in Britain. So the NHS's strategy was to keep people alive. Then its other aspect was to give universal health care. Wonderful aspirations, and have delivered on. Then they had to look at the emergency situation, someone having an infection. So Alexander Fleming and the identification of antibiotics changes the second part of the 20th century. We survived disease for the first time, truly for the first time. So this was this roadmap to, my goodness, we can just find a medication and everything will be good. Except I have a cutting from 1945 in the New York Times, which Alexander Fleming says, be wary of the abuse of antibiotics, because once the bacteria find out how to defend, the antibiotics will end. And he said that the consumer will demand, first of all, antibiotics in the pill form, it used to be in injections, and secondly, they will demand it to be available everywhere. And that's exactly what happens. In certain countries of the world, in 7-Eleven you can buy an antibiotic.
So we have a problem with antibiotics and resistance. I'm not sure if you know this, but we have a herbicide called glyphosate that was originally patented as an antibiotic. So we have the majority of the major nations in the world taking antibiotics every day, and they don't even realize. We even have healthy people that are saying, I would never take medication, I'd never take an antibiotic.
But they eat it every day.
And they have glyphosate in their food, their coffee, their Starbucks, their bread, their packaged foods. And they're getting actually antibiotic every day.
Yeah. So I do know a lot about glyphosate, and I do know a lot about antibiotic resistance. I've invested in a company in Finland that measures antibiotic resistance called Resistomap, and we've now have data on 50 countries around the world. But for anybody listening, if we don't understand that the biggest threat to humanity is the failure of antibiotics and an antibiotic-resistant environment, then you need to get reading. Dame Sally Davis, who is the former Chief Medical Officer of Great Britain of the NHS, had just came out yesterday in a big conference in Switzerland stating that we've got to address this now.
We do have a problem right now. I mean, it's pretty serious.
It's very serious. And
I came from, I had, in the early stages of detection, I had MRSA, and I had a boil on my butt cheek. And I went in, and I was in Canada, and it was starting to really ramp up in the United States, but this is early 2000s. And the doctor, gave me penicillin, didn't do anything. And then I go back, and he sits down, he says, are you married? And I said, yeah. Happily married? I said, yeah. Why? Have you engaged with sex workers. And I'm like, I've got a boil on my butt that's this big, drilling a hole in my butt. And that was the commentary that I was getting. Now, at the same time, I went back down to the United States. I was between the United States and Canada. And I still had this. I went to the hospital. They were like, whoa, right away. Into emergency, gave me vancomycin, IV drip, like super heavy, and they knew right away. And so this whole idea of bacteria resistance to antibiotic, it's become an epidemic worldwide right now.
Absolutely, and so we have data that suggests that and I've got to get this number right because I was looking at it the other day. We are going to see in the next 25 years around 200 million associated deaths to antibiotic resistance around the world. Now, whatever the number is, it's a very large number and equal to cancer and other lifestyle diseases that we are being exposed to. And the problem is there is no cure for it.
Yeah.
So the only way to do it is build resilience in the body. And there's some really good natural spore biotics that work to help build the resistance in the gut against MRSA, for example, as it invades. It doesn't stop it invading, it just stops it taking control.
So you have a very medical background, scientific medical background, but everything you're talking about is actually preventative, natural.
I'm not a doctor. I trained in law. I didn't complete my law education, moved into a very bad banking job and met that doctor I spoke about at the beginning.
So you're coming in from a different...
I came in at a very different, but
yeah.
I'm very curious. I'm curious about how the world gets itself into a situation.
I think that's where you and I meet, because I'm not a doctor. Mm-hmm. I came in from running businesses and technology and figuring out systems and looked at the body and says, this doesn't make sense. So a question for you, what do you see? First of all, you test a large number of people worldwide, right?
Yes, we do.
And how many countries would you be collecting samples from?
Typically in a month, we collect from 80 countries around the world.
So needless to say, you have better statistics worldwide than almost any healthcare system in any given part of the world, because you can see a little bit of what's going on everywhere.
Yes.
So what do you see currently is some of your lab is, what is your lab testing or seeing in people that would think that they're healthy right now? That's one of the bigger problems.
I think there's a naivety around the idea that if you can stand up, you're well, because there's 1 trillion bacterial communication going on in the gut that may be working against you or working for you. And so anyone who travels, which is now becoming it's the pastime of the world,
like
basically,
us.
like us, we should be doing regular stool checks for microbiome changes. It's not looking for the disease, it's just looking to make sure and maintain the wellness in the gut. Because once it moves, once that bacterial shift happens, it's quite difficult to re-engage it to a beneficial environment. And what we've seen in the late 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, and back to our glyphosate problem and our antibiotic problem, is that children born C-section have a significantly lower total microbiome count and a much higher resistant bacteria count.
You may or may not know, but C-section's a really big part. I have something on my story today about a little baby that had a C-section. I was working with, like, literally on the story today. I've also been able to show in practical and in laboratory work.
Got it.
I've been able to show in laboratory work that in C-sections, they also have restricted blood flow to the frontal lobe because the cranial suture doesn't properly expand. Yeah, because it doesn't have the stress going through the birth canal. So we've got microbiome issues. We've got structural issues. We've got breathing and blood flow regulation. And right now, 38% of deliveries are done, and I'm going to quote a U.S. number because I know that's true. I just don't know if it's equal to the rest of the world, are being delivered by C-section, when only 8% are medically valid.
Absolutely.
And I know the reason why. It's $50,000 to $70,000 for that live placenta.
Correct.
But they're being trained into that. And so you're noticing it in that, and there's a lot of people out here that are going to listen to this that are C-section, and they have microbiome issues, they have anxiety, depression, overthinking, and all of these things.
Immune dysfunction, impaired immune function, because again...
Are you testing for that?
Yes.
So if I have a C-section?
So if we go backtrack a little bit, first of all, if I was considering having children today, I have 2 grown-up sons, so I'm not planning to have any more children, but if I was, then I would be looking very, very much at both parents' biochemical structure. Make sure you're functioning optimally. And
when you're conceiving?
Before conception.
Yeah.
So off medication where possible, checking microbiome, check hormones, check organic acids, check immune markers. It's not that complicated, and it gives a huge boost to the nutritional status of each individual. So when conception occurs, both sperm and egg are firing on the best performance level. What we saw in a study that we did at the University of Las Vegas which we called Grow Baby, and my friends Dr. Michael and Leslie Stone and Emily Ryburn developed this concept, and we built the genetic test for them called Grow Baby. We took 100 pregnant women from South Las Vegas. We know that the preterm birth rate is 11%. The miscarriage rate is quite high. I think it's around 15%. And gestational diabetes is very high. And what we did was we looked at the genetic makeup of the mother-to-be, and from those few genes, we're able to understand a lot about her ability to carry her child 9 months and deliver to term.
So you can
at
actually
normal
see
weight.
that?
We can build a program for that mother.
Wow. So, I mean, by the way, that's part of our market. Over 70% women, end of childbearing years. I think it's almost 50% of those 70%. So, that being the case, you can, if parents are watching this and they want to conceive, doing tests on both.
If it was me, you've got a chance to hit gold.
And these tests are available to people?
They are not available. Some of them are available direct. Most are available through clinicians, but they're all. But
you do them though too, though.
Sorry?
People could. Some of the tests have to be done local.
Some of the tests have to be done local, and some have to be done through clinicians. But
do you have this? Is that information available somewhere?
Yes, on our website, nordiclabs.com.
And what would they look for that?
They would just look up Nordic Laboratories or Nordic Labs or DNA Life.
I mean, what kind of tests would they, if I was going to conceive?
So again, let's just right now think about our ability to produce a decent cell. That's our job. And whether we're trying to conceive or we're just trying to be healthy, it's the same story. So we need to be sure, and using your analogy from earlier on about, we're going at 50 kilometers an hour, we need to make sure the engine's firing properly. So that's your small intestine.
Yeah.
Do we metabolize fatty acids, proteins, carbohydrates properly? And are there blocks in the system? And we know this. There's decent research. We can see if you have a block on fatty acid metabolism, that it's due to different cofactors, that maybe B vitamins, carnitine, and we can change that infrastructure, that delivery system, to free up that process in that part of the engine. So you get a freer, better, they call it the piston driving. Then as you push the petrol through the engine and drive the car, we need it to be firing through the large intestine, hormonal system, immune system. So again, the question is, can I perform better? Yes, you can, but we need to know where there are blocks. And that's the reason why you would do what we would call these functional tests.
Okay.
But before that, you would want to do a genetic test. So genetics is our structure. It's who we are. It doesn't define us. That's important. People say, oh, it's my genes. nonsense, I'm afraid. It's not your genes. It's what you've done with your genes.
It's the building blocks.
It's the building blocks, but then you go and abuse that block or you optimize it.
Sure.
So in this study that we did called Grow Baby, what we showed was that by changing, relatively simply, their diet and lifestyle of these 100 women and focusing on their individual requirements, we went from a 11% preterm birth rate to 1%. That saved insurers $650,000 directly on the study. But more importantly, those children were born to term at normal weight.
If fascial maneuvers have transformed your life like they have mine, take the next step and help others. We have a certified coaching program, and you don't need to be a practitioner or a coach to do it. If you want to learn more about your own body in detail and help others, this is the program for you. Our certified program will not only show you the basic tools on how to help yourself, it will give you the business expertise and contacts to make it happen. If now is the time to change your life, then take that step today. I guess worldwide, there's a move from insurers to start looking at this.
I think so.
Because insurers have also been told by pharmacology, and they've also been educated by pharmacology, and the insurers don't necessarily agree with pharma, because they're in the business of actually spending less money.
Yeah, minimizing cost, expenditure.
So if I'm gonna go take this series of tests, is this something that we could actually put as a document? Here's a test that you want to do.
Yeah.
So we can, at the end of this podcast, we'll link this in the notes where somebody can go and say, these are the tests I need to get. Now, some of them they can get locally, some of them they can get through you.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay, and if I wanted to kick out of the system generally and say, I don't believe this system, I don't believe the way they're testing, I want to do this all myself, can I go engage and do almost all of these tests through your laboratories?
Yes, but we want you to work together with a clinician because there's a lot of information. So these clinicians that we're talking about that work with us have all been trained within these tests. They are these so-called functional medicine doctors. They're both medical doctors, naturopaths, nutritionists, chiropractors.
And you have these all over the world.
And they're all over the world.
Yeah.
And they're growing numbers, massive influx towards this type
I
of medicine.
I can definitely say that I can see that change. Because when I had my clinic, even in 2014, when we started, functional medicine was still there's very few people. In California, it was just starting to gain steam. But today
we have to thank COVID for the acceleration in people waking up to their health. So we have, though, developed a test that we can put on after the podcast, a link to. It's called we'll call it humangarage.DNA Life VMS, where we will put an offer on for the DNA core test. This is our basic.
The basic framework. Start off with that.
And we will offer a very good price to your listeners, and they will get a consultation. It's it's an interpretation rather than a consultation.
Sure. And so for me to go and do my DNA test, what am I going to find out?
So the whole world's talking about genetics at one level or the other, and 23andMe has been the most obvious and big.
Oh my gosh, is that a story?
It is a story.
The story of what happened business-wise.
All round, from the get-go, from their very strange start point.
How did anybody think that was going to be a good idea?
We jumped on the dream of knowing about ourselves for a relatively inexpensive cost, and that was what they were saying.
Can we get into a little bit of controversy?
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think the entire board of directors resigns in one day?
Well, I mean, firstly, they have an explanation problem. What was the company standing for? Were they providing data to a consumer that had the right to control that, or were they taking from the consumer without explaining?
Well, that's what they were doing. And what if you were a conspiracy theorist and you put on a tinfoil hat? What would you say that they're going to do with all that DNA information?
Well, let's be a little bit careful here, because I mean, I remember Bill Clinton standing on the White House the day that we finished the human genome experiment and showed, today we've made a step closer to God.
I remember that. Yeah.
And it wasn't entirely true.
No.
It was in the code, the unraveling of the code, we only got around 97% of the code unraveled. So that means there's 3% we don't know. today, 25 years later, actually it's probably 95%. So we've got about 5% of the code we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of good research going on all over the world within this sphere, but too often the jump to the interpretation is too quick.
Sure.
This gene means this. But even in cystic fibrosis, which we know is genetically, it's an hereditary disease, still people with their gene expression don't develop the disease. So why? Question mark.
Epigenetics.
But actual genetic reconstruction somewhere else in the genome that protects those few people that don't develop the disease. We don't understand why, we don't understand how it happened, but it's there. So there's
Can we jump to can we jump in a positive way to say that that people who have less stress have better genetic reconstruction?
Well, there's a very nice study published last year that showed, so we sort of know that there are three main gene constructs that code for a shorter life, a medium life, and a long life at a very broad level. And those that, when we take in lifestyle considerations for that, from smoking, diet, exercise, stress, sleep, etc., there's good evidence that those people with the so-called long life genes that live a bad lifestyle have a lot of years to lose, whilst those with the so-called poor gene life expectancy is you can extend tremendously by living a good lifestyle according to those gene expressions. So the point about understanding your genes is it's you're unique. You're not the same as your mother, your brother, your daughter, or anybody else in your family. Not even identical twins, yes, but they're still exposed differently in their environments. So our challenge is to understand who we are and where the risk factors are. So going back to that study with the, you asked about 23andMe, let's follow on that. I know people get worried about their data, but really, they don't have anything. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff around that. I do, because I come from the security business originally. Everything that people are trying to hide is already exposed anyways. There's no hiding.
No, and again, you're unique. So the expression that you have in any given environment cannot be replicated in their database.
What about cloning?
Not from a 23andMe, for certain.
They're not getting it from there.
Basically, they're not. The 23andMe was using an Illumina chip that doesn't have your full genome. It has a part of it. So, but what we do.
So we can knock that conspiracy.
I think for me, it was a bad business model because their start point was, could we find the gene that caused the disease? That was a good start, a good logic, but it's not true. There is no gene that starts the disease.
Yeah.
So then it ran out of steam. What were they able to sell? Who were they selling to? They were all selling at such a price that they couldn't make money, and obviously they couldn't sell the data because no one wanted it. That's why I think it failed. But going back to ours, and in DNA Life, I met a guy called Dr. Danny Mayersfield in 2012 who flipped it for me completely. He wasn't looking at how big the genome was. He was looking at those genes that performed in a certain way that when exposed in the environment could be supported one way or the other. And that's when the light bulb went on for me and said, that's what I want to employ with genetics.
Right, okay. So, and that's where, I would assume that's where you really saw that testing in this way could change somebody's life.
Absolutely. We can see, really from your genetic code, from the basic, again, be very clear, we're only measuring, in our case, a handful or 100 odd SNPs out of the 20 million genes that we have. So we're only doing 100. But from those 100, we learn a lot about the performance of any given individual to move them into a state of, let's call it, healthcare preparedness. What can I do to mitigate risk given a gene expression? It doesn't mean that because you have gene XYZ that you're going to end up with a terrible situation. It just means you need to be more aware. And so when you're more aware, you can test using what we call the functional tests to look at where might that be impaired. So if you forgive me a second, and I'll try and explain as simply as I can, but we have a process of detoxification that includes several genes that are important in the metabolism of estrogen, for example. COMT, GSTT1 and GSTM1 and NQO1. They're 4 SNPs. If they are either underperforming or not even there, then certain biological processes are impaired. Fact. But if you support them, those challenges, you don't have to have the negative consequence. So there are certain products that are in the market that support those gene expressions to amplify the effect. And if we know that, and we take nutrition to support it, the probability of developing a disease is much less.
So let's talk about because I genuinely want to know now. There's a lot of influencers talking about specifically like the MTFR. What's your whole take on that right now?
My take hasn't changed in the 10 years or so since it came out. I mean,
I'm asking because I have an idea what your answer is going to be.
But so it's very naive to believe that one gene is the cause of all problems.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
And
but a lot of people do believe that right now.
Well, that's a miscommunication of as you say, of a firing influencer industry that thinks that it's as simple as oh, have I MTHFR, as if it's a disease. It's not. It's a gene expression. However, and this is my caveat on it, the very fact that people are talking about MTHFR suggests that we have a early stage understanding of what genes might mean to oneself. And back to 23andMe, that is their number one addition to humanity, was that they made this test available to everyone in the world. So if people start talking about MTHFR, stop up a second and say, okay, do I really have one gene that is determinant of my life? No. What I should be doing is a broader panel to understand that infrastructure, that scaffolding of who we are.
Right.
So my response is, I don't listen too much to the one gene system. I do think it's a nice way to enter into the world of consideration, but you should definitely not just sit on there.
Yeah, because if you have it or not, it's supporting the expression in other ways.
Yes.
And this comes down to epigenetics. And one of the greatest stressors on the human body, from my experience, is one of the greatest impactors on genes would be stress.
Yeah.
And if I live a stressful life, and people, one of the things that the other, what came down from my side when I came into the business looking at function and what decreased function. Well, stress decreased function. And then what is stress? People, even a lot of doctors and practitioners would say, well, stress is your work, your job, your living situations and all that. And I said, that's not stress. Stress, those are stressors. Stress is my response to it. And if I'm living a healthy life, if I'm walking to and from, if I'm getting exercise, eating good and stuff like that, then those stressors don't have that impact on me so greatly. So stress is my actual reaction to the stressor.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I'm very conscious of what I'm again about to say. But when I wake up in the morning, I just think the world's great.
I mean, you do live it. You walked over here.
Yeah, I walked. Yeah.
And you walk. You have meetings and you walk in this Dubai heat, and you walk 8-10 miles.
Kilometers, 8-10 kilometers.
Kilometers, sorry. Yeah, on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So you do live a healthy life.
Yeah, I mean, so again, we go all the way back to 1994 when this awakening was happening, what was going on. I realized that nutrition is essential. We spoke about glyphosate. I buy organic. It's very, very important. We have to support farming. We have to stop spraying of fields. We have to stop the use of chemicals everywhere. We had an earth that produced awesome produce. And that's what I'm striving for, what I want in my body. So from even when I was in my early 20s and we had really no money, so people say to me, but Chris, living organically is so expensive.
Yeah.
No, it's a choice. It means you might not go out for dinner 3 or 4 times a month, but but you eat the right produce.
Because there's not organic vegetables.
That's true.
Hey, we have done some functional studies on this, and they're anecdotal, but they're like through our communities and stuff like that. What we've discovered is that the price of organic food generally is between 30 and 40% more. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that when somebody truly eats organic all the way through, they eat somewhere between 40 and 50% less food.
Yeah.
Because they absorb more.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more nutrients in the food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because your body's not fighting to deal with the pesticides and herbicides that come along with the food, then it has more capacity to absorb the nutrients that are in that food.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, and that was the first take on a big shift in my lifestyle. The second thing was that when my eldest son was born in '97, and when we had to send him off to school, we wanted to make sure that he got the right nutrients, and so we devised what we call the Nordic smoothie. And in the Nordic smoothie, it's packed full of nutrients.
Right.
And the key bit was to show little Oscar, my little boy, that you're going to make breakfast now, which I think is an odd term anyway, but anyway, this is breakfast, and in breakfast we're going to be putting some nice berries into the smoothie. But when he's not looking, because he's putting the berries in, when he's not looking, you're putting greens and you're putting cauliflower and you're putting all sorts of other vegetables that he would naturally say, oh, I don't like that. Then you put in flaxseed oil and you put in probiotics and you put in protein powder of high quality proteins, greens. We have a product called Nucleotides that help build DNA, replicating DNA.
Well, okay, so I just actually took that.
You did.
And I can tell you, because I told you that I know that I just ordered some aminos today because I know that I'm not absorbing my protein right. And it hasn't been long, but I can tell by the function of my body. And I took the nucleotides about 40 minutes ago, and I can feel the functional issues in my body already changing.
Well, if we get look at, I mean, this product is like, it's a crazy situation. There's so much known about supplementation in the world, and yet basic biochemistry, which is this, no one's really heard of. And I met this wonderful, truly wonderful Swiss researcher. His name is Dr. Peter Kuppel, 15 years ago. And he doesn't speak very loudly, but he's a wealth of knowledge. And so I flew to Zurich and spoke to him for a full day on all his research around what nucleotides do in the body. And they have three main roles, and that everybody is deficient, number one, in nucleotides. So the two forms of nucleotides, there's purines and pyridamines. Purines you get generally from vegetation, pyridamines you get generally from offal meat. And so we don't eat offal today, or very much less than we used to. In there are the base pairs of DNA replication. So we are missing, often, two of the main base pairs. So DNA replication is hard, and it's not a natural process. You use a lot of energy, you have to find different ways to do it. The second way, so it's very, very important for clean DNA replication. The second one is that, alluding to your point about people that eat protein powders for amino acid content to help build muscle, which is all correct, require a secondary process. So those proteins get broken down into amino acids, and for use of an analogy, I use the idea that these different amino acids are different colored children's balloons at a birthday party. They're all got helium in them, and if you let them go, they rise up to the ceiling, and the kids get upset because they can't get hold of the balloons. So they need a string on the balloon, and the nucleotides are the string. So for what happens then, they're pulled onto a train of RNA into the cytoplasm and released for protein synthesis. So nucleotides are enormously important for DNA replication and for protein synthesis. And they have a third main function in the gut where they help absorb nutrients. But if you ask the vast majority of doctors around the world, they will not know what they're for. And the problem is, the other thing is that if you give a nucleotide product that contains both purines and pyridamines without considering that you're already getting a lot from your diet, you'll be still deficient in the pyridamines. So this product contains more pyridamines than purines and is a very, very good source of base nutrition. And if there was one thing I had every single day, it would be this.
Amazingly enough, so when you came in here, I was feeling tired. I've been on the road for a long time, over a year. I can tell that because I'm not in nature, which is my normal thing. I'm in city environments, like pollution in city environments, and I don't have consistent food, and I know that that my body is looking for a little bit of change. I can tell, and I since I've taken that, what I can feel is the first thing I felt, because I'm super sensitive to this stuff, is I could feel the edges of my skin inside.
Yep.
I could feel the edges of my body, feel like something was connecting, and I could feel my focus and concentration getting better, and then now I've had this issue that I could feel almost like a soreness in my joints, which would normally be not enough protein absorption. I just know that from my own body and over time. So I've taken that and only that since you've come in, and I can feel the difference.
I think really, when in athletes that were professional athletes that were using this product in a study in the John Moores University in Liverpool, they showed that the athletes ran further, ran faster, recovered quicker, had lower training, post-training CRP, and cortisol levels were more balanced just from taking that. It's a really big physiological impact.
Is that available everywhere?
It's available through our web shop on greathealth.eu, and we can ship globally.
Most places.
Yep.
So
just going back to the smoothie, just to get that framework.
Yeah.
So this was smoothies are. People say, oh, well, you don't get to chew, you don't get this. There's lots of things that may be imperfect, but the bottom line is we put in all the nutrition that we think is required. Collagen is massively important, and we invested in a company called Functional Future that produce organic, biodynamic bone broth from Danish and Swedish cattle that extract, just like your grandmother made her bone broth. We do the same, except we are able to maintain the collagen and the hyaluronic acid in the same product. It's two young guys that developed this technology. They're fantastic, really fantastic, but collagen's enormously important. So we put that in, and then you mix it all up. We use water. You don't need milk. You use water, and that little kid Oscar would go to school with the right nutrition to then get through his day. So that was the start of this journey of what can I do to protect my body. And then at the same time, I have done literally hundreds of samples throughout the last 30 years to measure all sorts of things of how I'm performing. I use Oura rings. I have a chip in my arm that measures temperature. I know everyone gets a bit panicky, but the future is going to be about longitudinal data sets. How can we see problems before they arise? And rise in temperature is indicative of an infection or something happening. Just like a rise in resting heart rate can be because of stress, can be because of an infection or something. But if we can see it happening, we're going to mitigate and we're going to change our lifestyle. So these apps and these gadgets, very, very important, I think, in helping to teach yourself about how your body works.
Well, that comes back to a point, teaching yourself how your body works. That's the primary focus of what we're doing, is listening to your body. Like everything from eating intuitively to knowing what it is. Like I knew that I was deficient in aminos. I knew that. I knew that for the last 7 days. I could feel it. I could feel how my body reacted.
Yeah, sure.
Now, but that was an innate wisdom, I believe, that human beings naturally had at some point, and we've lost.
Well, we know from in pregnancy, women crave certain things, which doesn't seem logical. Right. But it's not necessarily a brain ticking over and saying, oh, I need to go into the soil and get whatever's in there. It's a biological demand for a physiological expression. It's the way I explain to people, it's a reticular activating system. To get maybe a little bit on the too much information side, when we urinate and defecate, we used to do it outdoors. The odor informs the olfactory nerves, which is the organs, and the organs have the highest olfactory nerve sensors, and the olfactory nerves would understand from the elimination what the body was missing,
and then it would trigger the reticular activating system to then seek and crave things. I'll give you a really interesting one. I've hated dates my whole life. My entire life, despised them. You put a dates in a smoothie, you put it somewhere. I mean, if you had date bars, I would like literally throw it. Year ago, all of a sudden, I can't eat enough of them. And so, being the curious kind of guy that I am, I'm like, okay, so what's in dates? Well, one thing that's in dates, high amounts of copper, and copper is used for electrical systems, and I've been reducing my muscle content and increasing fascial content, and that's our electrical system. And in a simple layman's kind of way, that made sense to me. I mean, it made sense that my body was then seeking something else. Sure. But the feedback mechanisms are gone today too, which is another issue. Like we don't urinate and defecate, and we do it in these sanitized environments, which I know sounds nice, but we spray perfumes and colognes, and especially in Dubai.
Yep, especially.
I went in for this. Have you met a doctor? Have you met the ozone doctor, Dr. Samath?
Dr.
Samath.
No, I don't think so.
So
I know a lot about ozone.
Ozone clinic they call him Ozone Doctor. Super cool stuff. I did an inesphoresis treatment.
Yeah, great.
So I took all my blood out, put it back in, and then looked at my
plasma
looked at the dirty plasma. But this one here doesn't replace the plasma; it cleans it, puts it back in. So you don't have to use boosters and stuff like that. But I could see when they took it out, I could see the microplastics, and I could see the heavy metal that was in my blood. The microplastics are actually what freaked me out, because I'm careful. I'm the most careful guy I know. I don't wear anything that puts that. I reduce my touching of plastic, everything, and I had that much in my system.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
So to bring this back down...
But just on that, I think that intervention may very well be the best discovery or usage in the 2020s for prolonging a healthy life. And we need to learn a lot more about what that really means, but it is effectively a filter system for your body to remove the toxins and those plastics and heavy metals in a way that is going to empower the body to function better because it's cleaner. We know from terrible studies, no good studies, but terrible information coming from fertility clinics that men now, 100% of men in I think it was in Prague, had plastics in their testes.
Yeah, that's actually becoming even well known in the influence.
Now here's my concern, and it's not backed up in science, so I'm not going to say this is going to happen, but just walk through the logic. We know in Alzheimer's patients that have a autopsy, they have significant higher levels of plastic compared to people that died of natural causes that didn't have Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's may be being accelerated or impacted by these plastics that have crossed the blood-brain barrier. Okay, wait a second, let me finish.
Yeah.
Because these are elderly people.
Yeah.
We are now finding children born having microplastics in their blood.
Yeah, for sure.
So that for sure is going to cross the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah.
And my fear is that unless we find a way to clean this out, we're going to have significantly impaired neurological function in children in the next 20-25 years. So
it's already happening.
Yeah.
From a functional standpoint, our children, they don't act the same way that we did. They don't have the same cognitive reasoning sort of resources.
No, I agree.
And
I'm in the gym here, and I don't even know how to explain this to people properly, but I grew up in a big farm in England. I had thousands of acres that I could run across, and cycled every day and played with my brother in the hay barns and ran all around. I've seen kids here in the gym that I'm in being trained to run or even walk backwards.
Yeah.
They don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They've lost that sense.
Yeah, and even crawling.
Yeah.
Because they can't crawl. These are functional patterns. I'll tell you what I've learned. So I started, and I noticed, because I originally started in the medicine space, physical medicine. It was driven towards a body repair, like alignment process. And I could tell that when somebody was too dehydrated, we couldn't get them into alignment. So we would run a series of tests, and what we found out was 88% of 10,000 patients we tested were chronically dehydrated. And so a couple things we found out about it. Number one was they had high levels of barium, strontium, aluminum in their hair follicles. Barium was depleting their silica. With silica depletion, they weren't able to absorb their proper minerals, and then the water was deficient. That's what we found. The other thing that I found is that when they had this high level of dehydration, their stress responses to everything would go up, because their movement, the fascia, is dehydrated. So now movement is restricted. And not, when I say movement, all movement, and the origin of all movement is breath. So when you restrict breath, the body fires adrenaline. And so we have a culture of children and people that are becoming chronically dehydrated. So 30 years ago, when I studied, we were 70% water. It's still kind of taught today. It's taught in education. In medical school, they're teaching 60% water today. When my body is functionally easy 80% water. I don't know if you grab my.
Yep.
It's gonna grab my ear. Now that feels like a baby, almost unusual, and that's 80% water, which I've worked really hard to understand this process. And in getting rid of rehydrating my body, all of my issues, and moving my fascia, rehydrating my body, 35 years worth of issues that I was managing for 10 years in my clinic by practitioner work, massages, chiropractic, craniopathy, Chinese medicine, herbs, everything, but I was managing it with that. When the pandemic came, I was in pain again. And so I started doing these maneuvers and mineralizing my body, bringing my water content back up. And all of my pains for 35 years went away. I figured that, in a simple logic, if we're predominantly made of water and we're deficient in our primary building block, then we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, sure.
And that affects your microbiome,
Sure.
That affects your cognitive function.
But then we've gone to an idea that taking liquid, any liquid, is akin to drinking water.
Well,
It is.
furthermore, the number one cause of chronic dehydration is the overconsumption of water, because we drink water that's demineralized. So we drink demineralized water, the water takes the minerals out of us.
Yeah, true.
So part of it is we've been forced to drink demineralized water because the worst atrocity, I think, laid on mankind is reverse osmosis water. Because it's void of everything. It strips everything out of us as it goes through. That water has nothing in it. It takes everything, every mineral, everything out of us.
But there's also true if you're up at the top of the mountains and you get mountain water. Its saturation point is much lower than if you have water from groundwater, which is more or less filled, because of the hydrogen atoms vibrating so much. They attract anything that they go through. So the water in the mountains, which we know is good, is also low, has a much greater point to saturation than water in the groundwater.
For sure. That's why I drink hydrogen water. As a matter of fact, even when I'm traveling, I carry a Tech 900 hydrogen generator. You saw it last time.
Yeah, I did.
Well, I actually just, because I don't always bring a water filter, because if I'm staying for more than 2 weeks, I put a water filter in, an ionizer, but I put hydrogen in my water to just get a clean water source and hydrogen.
So, but my point about it is that we have to be, the cleansing process of water is efficient, and the ability of a water that is not saturated to cleave toxins out of the body on its way down, also potentially minerals, I'm dismissing that, is not a bad thing. What we need to do is make sure we have in our diet a broad spectrum of
Fair.
mineral-rich foods,
Fair
which we're not doing.
In the middle of all these great conversations, sometimes you still need to take a minute to stop and breathe. Let's do that together. We're going to breathe 3 times through the mouth and 3 times through the nose. This is going to activate and rebalance your parasympathetic nervous system so you can absorb more. Breathe in with me through your mouth. 2. 3. Now 3 breaths through the nose. 2. 3. Now with that simple 6-breath reset, you can go back and enjoy more content. Partly because even the organic food that's being grown today is mineral deficient.
Agreed.
This is why my philosophy, and this is all I did actually to turn it around. I turned my health around, and I'm on this journey to accelerate it in a new way. But I turn it around by taking 600 milligrams of silica a day, because we're being deficient in every breath we take. Barium is depleting our silica. Without silica, we don't absorb. Taking 104 minerals and moving my body, moving the fascia of my body. That is what made my turn. And then from there, I did another interesting thing, because I wanted to talk to you about this earlier. We have these microbiome issues. So I did a 44-day fast.
Yeah.
That changed everything. Yeah, I mean, that was a reset. That was a full reset. And we're in the Middle East, where Ramadan is supposed to be fasting, but it's not. It's eat as much as you can and gorge from sun all the way through to the morning.
Unfortunately, yeah.
But what's your take on fasting then?
Oh no, I think so. In 2009-10, I had the privilege of sitting in a classroom where I had 2 professors from the University of Pisa spend 2 days walking me through all their research on animal studies and significant reduced caloric intake down to 1/3 of normal, whatever normal might be. So this was everything from amoeba to fish to rats. What would be that impact? And in all cases, they extended life by 1/3. Yeah. So reduction of calories has an impact at cellular level that allows for the body to function for longer.
Okay, so I'm with you. I eat typically 1 meal a day with some snacks after that meal. Typically from 2 to about 6 or 7 is my eating window. I'm not too strict on it. That's my normal thing, and that has served me the best, by the way. What is your, since you have the genetic testing, let's talk about lifestyle choices. Carnivore versus vegan. What's your opinion?
I think it's a very complex and almost certainly individual choice.
Because there are certain people that are genetically dispositioned to have plant protein and animal protein.
Yeah. And again, whatever diet we're on, because if you live in Greenland, which has become one of the most spoken about countries in the world, but if you live in Greenland, you're going to eat a diet very rich in fish and very few vegetables. If you live in Central Africa, you're going to live in an environment of very many vegetation and much less meat, certainly less fish. These people survive. So
thrive.
Yeah. So the point is that your biology is informing what you require. As that's what we've alluded to multiple times in this discussion. We have to understand what is right. I'm of the opinion that if you're a carnivore and you're not eating organic meat, then you're killing yourself.
Let's agree. I think we can agree on one thing.
Whatever
your diet choice is, get rid of the chemicals.
Yes. Yeah. So if you're going to have, consequently, as you also alluded to, when people do eat organically, they don't eat as much. They don't need as much.
Sure. They absorb more.
And if you have now I'm going to, it's logical. I'll tell a story from my youth. we grew up on this farm, and my brother and I had the responsibility to look after a little bullock and a little heifer. We called them Fred and Frida, and every day we went to feed Fred and Frida, and we loved Fred and Frida, and we spoke to them and made sure they were happy. And I don't want anyone crying now, all right? But anyway, so we come home one day, and Fred and Frida are not in their pen. So I say to my dad, who's a farmer, I said, where's Fred and Frida? Oh, I've taken them out onto the paddock. I thought, that's a bit weird. But anyway, I remember thinking. And a few days later, I said, well, you know, I've been looking for Fred and Frida. Where are they? And he said, well, they're out there somewhere. So a couple of weeks later, Sunday lunch, I'm about 12 years old, and I'm eating this, and I put this meat in my mouth, and this tastes great. And my dad just looks up and he goes, yeah, that's probably Fred. And that's farming. That is farming.
That is how we're, that's how I have so many stories from that.
And it's not bad. That's the life of our interaction in an environment of nature.
Sure.
However, if you eat cattle that have been poorly raised, or worse, chickens, or worse, pigs, that have been poorly raised and injected with all sorts of things, and these chickens today are force fed. They've been injected with stuff to make themselves grow quicker. They break their poor little legs, and then they get very big, and they're slaughtered and they're put onto our plate. That's not meat I want to have, and I'd rather not eat meat than compromise that.
Yeah, I agree with that. What do you think about? We're going to agree upon this. I tell people all the time, whatever your lifestyle, whatever your dietary choices are, there's two things that you should know. That the body responds to contrast, and so that means the body needs change. Mm-hmm. Yes. The same thing all the time is bad.
I agree.
The second thing is, whatever your lifestyle choice is, whatever you want to eat, we're fighting over all these different diet styles, but really the only thing to fight over is chemicals or no chemicals. And nobody's fighting over that right now.
Well, you're right. And although with that said, you have to look at marketing campaigns and how they work. And if we go back to the pure business side of it, if you go back to 1971 in England, there was the start of the Stop Smoking campaign.
Yeah.
1971. By 1986, they see the first very significant drop. Why? Because they put an advert out that showed a cigarette melting, as it were, and all the destruction it was doing in the body. Nothing that someone didn't know necessarily, but this was very impactful. And the impact was, days after, cigarette smoking dropped by 10%, I think. It was so radical.
Yeah.
But then people say, why didn't you put that advert out in 1971? And the response is the consumer was not ready. Yeah. They would not have been able to understand that messaging.
Fair statement.
And now in organic world, in Denmark and Switzerland, they're the two biggest consumers of organic produce per capita in the world. They started their mission when I went to Denmark in the early 90s. There was organic produce. We're now 20 years on, 30 years on, and we see the organic demand going up and up and up.
Yeah.
So you can see the consumer now has become conscious of that choice and are beginning to demand it. So even the discount supermarkets offer organic. Now, you and I could then say, is it the right one? But the point is that the shift is occurring.
The awareness is starting.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. And it does take time. I say that in society, when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, the masses change.
Yeah.
So all of this testing, we talked a lot about nutrition. We've talked a lot about factors and lifestyle factors and stuff like that. What is it you want people to know about Nordic Laboratories? What is it that's important that they know?
I want people to understand that it's your body. Understand it as best as you can. Utilize the tools that are available. Nordic Laboratories is there to help that understanding process. We work with clinicians all around the world. Our mission is to help change healthcare. It's not an easy process, But if we do it hand in hand with people that understand that individualized, personalized healthcare is the way to mitigate disease best, then these types of tests will be used routinely, not to look for disease, but for looking for health status and help build a strong and resilient body.
So somebody watching this, one thing they can do is go do the genetic test, start off.
So we'll do that with the Human Garage. We'll do a special offer. Everybody will be able to get the test. We'll ship it all around the world, and they will have a interpretation included in the price that will allow them to speak to one of our trained people and to get that baseline information. And what I'm looking for is curiosity. Be curious about yourself. Ask yourself, could I perform differently? Is there an impact factor here or there? From there, in healthy people, right? What we want to say is, okay, then you need to look at your immune system, or your digestive system, or your endocrine system. These tests are all available to show, is there nuanced changes? They're not looking for disease. They're not diagnostic. They're there to help you get a picture of how you perform. So once you have that, you start making small, just like we've described today, small interventions. Change the water, eat a smoothie, fast a bit, do more exercise, sleep better, these types of things. And then you can see the changes in the biomarkers to say, okay, that's working. And if it starts going the wrong way, you say, oh, I need to change that to mitigate a risk factor. Now, unfortunately, the reality is that most of our clients today that use these tests are sick people who have not had any respite from the conventional system. And they're often being used as, from a doctor's perspective, to find out the real challenge. That's important, and we can do that. But it would be so much better if we could find it before the challenge became the problem.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, there's a philosophy, going back to the garage analogy. People go into the mechanic and he says, your brakes are almost failing, but they're not failed yet. So when they fail, come back to me, I'll fix them. That's our current model of health. And it makes no sense, but that's how we're doing it. Is there an example, like one that sticks out for you, where using your tests, somebody's had a radical shift in their lives, one that you talk about, that you tell people?
Yeah, I'm very conscious of being anecdotes you have to be cautious about. But I have two good friends actually in Dubai that had found out about what we did years and years ago. And they were trying to conceive and had been through 2 or 3 cycles of IVF and had failed. And in a conversation I had with the woman, I said, why don't you consult with one of our clinicians in Nordic Clinic in Copenhagen? And she did. We cleaned up her lifestyle, changed a bunch of things, did her genetics, and she conceived, I think, 3 to 6 months later. Naturally, she was in her very early 40s, I think. And 9 months later, they gave birth to this beautiful little girl, and who was their pride and joy, of course. And so this little girl is one of the first youngest people ever to have done her genetics with us. She was days old, this little girl.
Interesting.
And we got a picture of this little girl. And I remember saying to my team, please...
Technically, you got a picture of the parents.
We got a picture of the combined parent in that child. So I said to my team, please do not release the results until I've seen it, because this is a very young child. I don't want the mother getting over cautious. Anyway, didn't happen. They went back to the clinician, and then the patient saw it. She calls me up and she goes, Chris, what have I done to my little baby? And I said, what do you mean? She said, haven't you looked at her gene result? And I said, no. And we opened it up and we saw that she had a predominance for inflammatory genes. And I remember thinking, wow, that's unusual. So I said, oh, don't worry. The key bit is that you know about it. And when she starts complaining, if she does, about pain or comes with a rash or something, then maybe you need to consider that we have to look at the biology slightly differently. Sure enough, this little girl at the age of 3 or something develops rashes eczema over her body, and it's an inflammatory process that we then do food allergy testing, microbiome testing, and clean that up, whereas a dermatologist would have been putting cream on her.
Sure.
We looked at that diet and the inflammatory impact factors. Today I think she's 7, I think she just turned 7, beautiful little girl, everything functioning, and that's the power of utilizing, from the conception perspective, number 1, a child that's born into this world. Secondly, the little girl didn't have to go through years of being given medication or whatever else for a problem that was born from within the body that could be addressed.
That's cool. So I want to show you something. So I'm pushing in an area, thinking of the body in a slightly different way. Now, this is just something I've observed, and I'll start off by showing you my twin, okay, because this will make sense. You can see we have the same teeth line, same eyes, same hair, same ears, same colorations in through the skin and the neck.
Sure.
Very, very similar. So it's pretty easy to see that there's a resemblance, right? Now, in genealogy, we look at things like feet. And we can see that, the feet, one is the bigger one, hers is the smaller one. But the toes...
They mimic.
Yeah. The interesting thing, the most interesting thing about her and I is that we're actually from different parents.
You mean you were adopted, or...?
No, we're not twins. We're not twins at all. I just met her. Okay, that's interesting, right?
Sure.
Okay, so, but there is something that I've noticed that was the same between us. Okay, this is a series of astrology chart. So this is my degree, or her degree, and that's my degree. These are the numbers that define our birth. And the only thing that's different is our 16-degree cap on the moon. The moon is different, moon is what controls the water.
Yep.
And then we have the rising and the midheaven. Rising is your ego, and the midheaven is where you're going. And this is the way the chart looks, and it looks like that same chart's been just turned slightly. That's pretty cool, right?
Very cool.
I'm still trying to figure that out, but what if I told you that I have found 45 of them?
Yeah.
So we're not twins, but somehow we
mimic.
We are. And then when I'm going through something physically or emotionally,
so are they.
So are they.
Or at a turn. At the same time, or at that?
Same time. Exactly the same time. So what I propose, and this is part of what I'm going out to the world to propose, is I have these observations like this, and that's just the first of them, that I don't have an answer for.
Yeah.
And one thing is that what I have noticed though is that all of those numbers mean something to me. So I would say that's astrology. So I would say that the way I describe it is my astrology is let's say my soul's DNA. It's the numbers that make it up. And somehow that entropic field around me is that part of me that I can't see. It's measurable. Somehow it's sending information into my biology.
Yep.
And that code seems to be the code at which it transits.
Yep.
So my mind says the DNA receives it, the RNA translates it, and the emotions are what carry it.
Yep.
From a genetic point of view, somebody who looks at genetics, am I crazy or?
No, I don't think it. So years and years and years ago, I worked with Dr. Sidney Baker, McDonald Baker, he's based in Connecticut. And one of the real, in my opinion, one of the real leaders of the functional medicine movement, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s. And he was passionate about looking at autism and trying to understand the biochemistry of autism. And brilliant guy, really brilliant. And he got frustrated time and time and time again because he would approach that autistic child the one in front of him, the same way as he approached the one before. So he would be doing all this evaluation biologically to see, what was this happening there. Whereas the one before, he had tremendous results, and the little kid developed well, moved perhaps out of their autism diagnosis. But the one in front of him that he's been working on with almost the same symptoms, no change. And it would frustrate him, as you can imagine. And he and I would speak very regularly on, what was the mechanism going on here? Why can we get success in one child? And we were experiencing exactly the same in our clinics in Scandinavia. We had tremendous success with a number of autistic kids on the spectrum, but some we had no change, nothing. And yet the tools we were using were the same, the knowledge was the same, but there was some block somewhere. And so Dr. Sid, set up an organization called Autism 360. And this is 2005, 6, something like that. So still quite early in the internet age. And he suggested that autism can be reflected across the world. And there will be somebody somewhere that has had great benefit by doing intervention XYZ in their child. And there's another child somewhere in the world that would benefit from that. And if they could marry up the symptoms, the personality, whatever it might be, perhaps that was a clue to how to treat them.
That's what I'm working on. Exactly. So I can point out, and this crazy study of mine, because I have such a wide access to people, I say I'm looking for people that match this criteria, and they start coming.
Yep. And I'm not. So now we're going almost on to metaphysical as well.
Well, that's where I want to get to. I have noticed that applying treatment, because I have a whole bunch of twins I treated, that some twins have identical response to stimulus, treatment or otherwise, and some had different ones. The ones that had different ones, so when, in a way, astrology works, you're born within a minute range. And if you go past that minute range, it changes the moon, the water in the body, the ego, and where you're headed. And so what I did notice is that all the twins that were born within that range, so in other words, their astrology was identical, had identical response to stimulus. And those who were born slightly out of that range had different response to stimulus.
There was two British athletes in the early 1980s, Steve Coe and Sebastian Coe and Steve Ovett. They broke the world record for 1,500 meters and 800 meters, I think 6 times or 5 times in 21 days. It was remarkable. Now, discounting that there were any drugs involved, because especially Sebastian Coe, he's been very clear that there wasn't. These two had never again got anywhere close to it. After those 21 days, they never got anywhere near, even though they were training well. They may have been impacted by injury or something. And Sebastian Coe's world record for 800 meters stood until the late 90s, when a Danish athlete beat it. What they found is that their circadian rhythms, these two athletes, one born in New Zealand, one born in Britain, crossed, and for whatever reason drove them higher at that moment for those 21 days.
So, Kate, this is my study. So I've left, I'm having these interesting conversations with you about biological science. And one of the things that I've noticed is that if I take and put a bunch of frequency on you, EMFs, we know that affects the biology. Well, there's a measurable field of energy around us. And if that field is transmitting, or it's sending information back and forth. So that has to affect biology.
Sure,
and
I agree.
So I'm really moving in there, because what I deal with quite often are the cases that come to me are the ones who literally nothing else works.
Agreed.
They've even been through the genetics, and they've been through everything. Yep. Those are the ones that I typically get. And so I kept looking for different answers. And I can answer a lot of that astrologically now.
Yeah.
There's a guy, he's an astrologer, who tipped me changed my clinical career. His name's Santos Bonacci. He understands astrology, body, language. He's the one that taught me. Well, he didn't know he taught me until a couple weeks ago, but he taught me to look at tissue salts based on their astrology. And so in our clinic, now what we did with 10,000 patients is we give them a protocol that would have homeopathics and nutraceuticals. And what we did was we added a tissue salt based on their astrology, 1 through 12, their sign, and we monitored their success and their changes, and everybody improved. So I had all of this input that was pushing me to say there's more, and that's actually a large reason why I got out of the clinical practice, because I wanted to get my hands free so I could look at these esoteric or
Sure.
metaphysical actions.
Sure. I'm totally bought into for all the highbrow science that we as Nordic try and articulate, we're also very conscious that basically it comes down to what you put in your mouth, how you move, how you sleep, where you are at any given time, your exposures to one thing or the other. And in a 21st century strategy, we have to use tools that can help us understand how we're performing in this world of stresses, because people generally don't move. If I tell you your house is full of mold, then maybe you move. But if I tell you that out on the street there's too much pollution, you say, yeah, but everyone else is living here, so I'm going to stay here.
Yeah, of course.
So our 21st century mindset is, well, we understand there are these stresses or these threats, but we sort of navigate it. And in navigating it, for most of us, for most of the time, it's not a problem, until one day it is. But if we could have seen all the build-up earlier and made those changes that we've alluded to, again, everything we've said is more or less the same things. It's the water you drink, it's the food you eat, it's the exercise you do, it's the mindfulness, sleep. And then in individuals, now you're going into birth signs, time of birth, where you were, what happened in that moment. This defines us if we only reflect on our own humanity. But too often we just want to be clumped together. My friends don't do that. That's not, all my friends go this way, why don't I go that way? And I think that's a naivety of conformity. We are unique, and you've alluded to it even more at a sort of metaphysical level. That uniqueness is underpinning who we are, and if we keep pushing away from it, we're probably doing more destruction than good.
Where I'm at today is that I believe everything that happens to me is metaphysical. Even if I have a health issue. That does not dissolve me. This is where I feel people have gone wrong. It does not dissolve me from the responsibility of finding the proper things in the environment. Like whether it's a food or a supplement or an intervention or a movement or whatever it may be, a frequency, a light or something. And I feel that we're ready as a society to go. We went from genetics to epigenetics, and now we're going to what I feel is emotional genetics. The emotions that impact all that stuff. And I'm through that window. I'm at the metaphysical genetics. And all I can tell you is I don't know. But I'm curious as hell.
Yeah, me too.
And since I have this big platform, I'm using it to find people who are willing to just go on this journey and explore.
Yeah, I think I've built quite a successful business across the world. I love what I do, truly love what I do, and the biggest emotional gain is when we've helped someone's life change. Yeah, and
for sure.
And no one can ever take that away from me. Yeah, it doesn't matter if we go bankrupt. If I can still turn around and say we helped that person, then we've done a good thing. Yeah. So on this journey of mine, which has been really quite convoluted and odd, I never make a decision. It's not my decision. I'm being guided through a facility to do what I do, and I'm absolutely clear on that. I'm convinced that my job on this earth is to create a value proposition that helps change healthcare. And if I do it well, then the next generation will be able to leap beyond where we've been in this one. And I'm also completely convinced that the 2030s, health is a different picture, totally different for those that want to engage, to learn about all the things we've spoken about today. None of it is excluded, all of it should be included, and the more we learn about who we are, we will see awesomeness in the next generation.
Last question. Do you think that I would benefit by going through a process and looking at all of my genetics and testing and stuff like that?
Yes, because you're curious, because you want to find out how you perform, and then you can relate it to the world that you live in and say, yeah, this makes sense. I didn't know I had this bacterial overgrowth or lack of, or I have an impact in my small intestine which isn't allowing me to function, doesn't send the right neurotransmitters or whatever it might be. So I can do little tweaks, and those little tweaks will mean that you perform better.
I'm interested in going on a journey with you.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. And openly sharing it with the world.
Let's do it.
For me, I'm an open book.
Yeah.
And if I got a word on my face, I like to.
Yeah. And let's, I mean, that's the same mission that we have. We want this. I get really upset in the health industry about patents, for example.
Yeah.
Who has the right to patent your health?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who has the right to patent knowledge that will change humanity? So it's all about sharing. It's about giving back the knowledge that we've gained. I don't care, go back to our car analogy. If you have a beautiful car that's been built by a wonderful engineer and it's great, have the patents. That's my choice if I buy it or not. Yeah. But my health may not be affordable for me if somebody has patented a process that restricts the opportunity. And so I'm really about sharing the knowledge and wanting humanity to up itself, to take responsibility, to change their approach to their wellness, so that we don't become a burden on society, that we do provide our children with opportunities that we may not have had. And I might go back to the 1970s. We were born into a decade of utter chaos when it came to science, and spray the fields with this, eat this crappy food. By the 80s it got worse. The 90s we began being aware, and I can say that in the 70s it was okay to be naive. Today it's irresponsible when we have so much knowledge, and I implore people to take responsibility for their health. It's a great journey. I never get bored about finding out about myself, and I have a great life. I'm
looking forward to it. So we're going on a journey.
We'll start with your genetics. We'll do a microbiome test, we'll do an organic acids test, and we'll do a hormone test to see how it's all singing together.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, because I've literally avoided testing for a reason, because for a while I didn't want to know. I tested myself out for 25 years. So let's go on this journey together.
Let's do it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in, and if you enjoyed this content, follow us on social media channels, The Human Garage Experience, Apple, Spotify, and all other channels. We're on a mission to inspire 1 billion people worldwide, and the way that you participate is by liking, subscribing, and sharing our content. Every share that you take brings us one step closer to that billion people. This has been a fantastic episode. We enjoyed presenting it to you. Be a part of this worldwide revolution and share it now.